Hey everyone, welcome to my new tutorial. Today I want to make this cool car animation loop, and this is the model of the car I made for the Ace Ventura graphics from the last month, so you can find and download the car model in the description along with the finished tutorial files. So download the car model and get ready for animation, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, it will really help my channel to grow. And if you're new to the channel and you'd like to see content like this in the future, please hit that subscribe and additionally bell button if you want to get notified when I release something new. And if you're new to the world of 3D and Blender and you want to become a 3D illustrator, go and check out my courses that are carefully designed to teach you beginner and intermediate skills in quickest and most effective way. For example, with the new Ultimate 3D bundle, you can go from simple cubic designs all the way to full character illustration in a matter of weeks. So if you're interested, please go check out the link in the description. So let's start with the animation, and even though we'll be animating the car driving over the terrain, we'll not be moving the car itself. Basically we'll be just moving the props and the scene around the car. And the first thing I want to do is to create a particle simulation that will create the dust going from the wheels as it's driving over the sand. So let's press Shift A, and first of all I want to create the plane and scale it down. This will be the object that will be basically emitting the particles for us. So tab out, press G and then Shift Z to move it under the wheel here. So you should have something like this. And now let's go to the particle settings tab and let's create a new particle system. And first of all I want to reduce the number to something like 500, and let's modify the frame end to 120 and our length of the animation to 120 for the whole animation. And just jump to the output settings and switch this to 30 frames, so we have 4 seconds of animation there. And now our particle system will be emitting 420 frames. So let's play the animation, and this is how it looks like. These particles are emitted and only fall down, and we want to keep the physics so we can work with the velocity, but I don't want the gravity to work here. So let's jump here into the field weights and reduce the gravity to 0. And now we have these coming up, and that's because the velocity here is set to 1 meter per second on the normal direction. So let's set this to 0, and now let's enable velocity for y-axis, and let's start with something like 20. I want these particles to go really fast. I want the illusion that the car is going pretty quick, so this is something we have here now. This is quite a long trail, so what we can do here is to reduce the lifetime of the particles. Now it's set to 50 frames, so let's update this to something like 15, and now the trail should be much shorter, and I think this will look fine looking from the camera with the trail like this. So this will be the basic particle movement we need, and now we actually need to instantiate some particles. And for a low poly design like this, I want to use the flat shading here, and I want the faces to be visible. So let's pick something like icosphere here. So let's press Shift A and let's choose icosphere from the list, and let's modify it to only one subdivision. And I want to tab in, press S and scale it down tiny bit like this, tab out and press G then Z and move it down. We'll have the background plane there, so this won't be visible later. And I want to rename this to dust, so it's easily identifiable. And now let's select the particle object, and now in the render section let's switch from halo to object, and let's set this to dust. So I will enter DU and choose dust from the list. And we can see these are really small, so let's set something like 1.5 for scale. Maybe that's too much, so let's go lower. And scale randomness, I want this to be full, so I want really small and large particles as well. And now let's enable some rotation, and let's randomize it all the way and randomize phase as well, so we have something like this here. This is too narrow and this looks quite uniform, even though it's starting to look fine. And I think some random velocity would look great, so let's select the object again and go here and randomize the velocity. And I think we can afford to go something like 1.5. So this will change the behavior of the particles a little bit, and it will spread them out tiny bit as they go away from the car, so it will look a little bit better, I think. So that's the first particle system. And we'll need another one, and that's because if you want to create a loop animation, you will see the particles are starting here on the frame 1, and once you reach frame 120 you would need to go back to frame 1 and you would have no particles existing there. So what we can do is to create a new particle system slot and just switch it here to the original particle setting system. Now just click here to duplicate it. You will see that there's particle setting 002, and now we can modify its settings, and I want to change the frame start to -120 and end to frame 0. So this way we have already some particles, and now when you playback the animation you are basically starting at the end of the first particle system cycle. So this should loop quite nicely. If you want to change how these particles are distributed, you can always modify the seed for the first and the second particle system. Just keep them same. So I will, for example, change this to 5 and here as well. So remember to change the seed for both of those so they loop nicely. So that's the particle animation loop, and now I want to duplicate this. So let's select the object and press Alt D and Y to move it back. I want to create a new one here, and this will be slightly different. So let's select the first particle system slot and duplicate it there as well. You can see we created 003, so that's third particle system we have in place, and we want to keep everything same except the lifetime. I want to halve this down so the trail is a little bit shorter since we are starting from the back wheel, and at the same time I want to scroll down and increase the scale a little bit. So I want these particles in the back to be slightly larger. So now we have something like this, and it kind of adds to the randomness of the effect and looks quite fine. But now there's one more thing we need to do, and that's to modify both of those particle systems. So you can see we created the third here, but here we have still the 002 from the first object. So let's duplicate that one as well and halve the lifetime down here as well. So this way we really have a nice loop there going on. So now let's select both of those objects. Let's look from the front by pressing 1 on a numpad and press Alt D and X to duplicate it here. And now if you play them back, you can see we have the same animation going on. And if you want some variation, you need to change that seed. So that's pretty easy to do. Just select one of these particle systems and just click through them, and let's, for example, increase to 10. Don't forget about the second one. And now this one here. So let's set this to 10 and here as well. So now if we look at our particle simulation, it should look a little bit different on the other side. So that's our dust trail loop, and right now we can move on to animating the car itself. And basically there will be no manual animation here whatsoever. We'll just create few keyframes here. So let's select the car. Make sure you're selecting the car body and that everything else is parented to the car, and make sure you're on the frame 1, and let's press I and insert keyframe for location, and I again and insert keyframe for rotation. And now we can switch to the animation workspace and switch this part here to graph editor. And if you expand this part here, you could see all the tracks you have available. And now we won't be using X and Y locations, so we can disable them. And we'll only use rotation along the X-axis, so let's disable Y and Z rotation. So this is what we have here, and we have one keyframe for each of these tracks. So let's select Z location, for example, and now we can select this keyframe right here, press N for a side panel. Let's move this to the side a little bit, and now let's go to the modifiers and let's add noise modifier, and that will actually add some animation. You can see the car jumping, and it's a pretty random movement based on this noise generated. So first thing I want to do is to restrict the frame range because we want this to loop nicely, and I want the first and the last frame to be the same. So let's set the start frame to 1 and the end frame to 120, and this way we can be sure that the end point and beginning point of this animation is the same. And now we just need to update this because this is quite hectic. So let's set the scale to something like 5 and reduce the strength That's basically how high the car will jump. So we can reduce to something really small like 0.3. So you can see this is only like small bumps up and down as the car goes over the terrain. And now we can choose the rotation keyframe here and add another noise modifier. And let's do the same thing here. Let's restrict the frame rate from 1 to 120. And that will be our car jumping along its lateral axis. And now we can adjust this. So let's set the scale to something like 10 or 11 maybe, so it's not so hectic. And let's reduce the strength to something like 0.1. So you can see these small bumps as the car jumps from front to back, wheels and back. Maybe something like 0.15. Okay, works quite nicely, but you can see the wheels are a little bit still, so we'll add some movement there. And I made them as one object that has the origin point in the middle. So if you rotate them along the y-axis, you can see this movement right here, and that's what I will use here. So let's press I, make sure you're on the frame 1, and let's enter, and let's insert a rotation keyframe. So let's again hide the channels we don't need. So let's hide X and Z. And now let's select the channel and let's create a new noise modifier there as well. And we have something like this here. And again, this is probably too strong. So let's increase the scale tiny bit, something like 5, maybe less. And decrease the strength to something like 0.2. So it's a little bit jumpy, but not too much. And now it'll be pretty easy to move the same animation to the back wheels as well. Just select these wheels, shift click the first ones, and now let's go to Ctrl L and link animation data. That will transfer the same animation to the wheels in the back as well, but we don't want them to be jumping at the same time. So what we can do is to shift this animation a little bit, and now we kind of need to decouple these animation because they are linked. If we make change to the front wheels, it will transfer to the back as well. So let's go to the object menu here, relations, make single user, and choose object animation, and that will decouple the animation. So now we can go here and just enable some offset, and let's set something like 60 frames. And now you will see they're jumping at a different pace. They're doing the same movement but a little bit shifted, which kind of makes sense because they're going over the same terrain just with a little bit of a time difference. So let's go to the layout view and let's preview our animation. And I think this looks quite nice, so let's finish up with some background. Let's press Shift A and let's add a plane. I will tab in and press S and scale this 15 times. And now let's set up some camera. I will press N for a side panel and use my Isocam add-on. You can find the link in the description. Just go there, download it and install. And now I'll just enable True Isocam here and change its preferences a little bit. So I'll go probably a little bit closer here, and let's change output to 1600 to 1200 and press G then Z to move the camera up a tiny bit. So this will be our animation frame, and let's modify the terrain a little bit. So tab in, right click and choose subdivide, and we can either increase the subdivision rate here or subdivide few times with the right click menu. So now that we have a mesh like this, let's modify the terrain, but we need to be careful that the front and the back edge of this geometry is the same because we want to loop this animation and move them around. So let's enable symmetry along the y-axis here. So now if you move something here, it will move on the other side as well. So now let's select some of these verts. Let's enable proportional editing, press G, then Z. Increase the fall off with the mouse wheel and make very small terrain changes like that. Okay, something like this. And now we can switch to random and do some slight adjustments there. Very simple, like this. And now alt click this loop and maybe alt shift click one more and press H to hide these vertices. And don't forget to hide the back loops as well. So now we are able to make the adjustments to the rest of the plane. So let's switch to the smooth and let's create these small bumps. Don't go too crazy here, just modify the terrain slightly. The car isn't rigged or anything. We basically just faked the movement with some noise generation, so we kind of need as flat terrain as possible. And now let's switch this to random again, select the vertex in the middle, press G then Z and increase the fall off to create some random bumps like this. Now press Alt H to unhide these vertices, that should be the same. Press A to select all and Ctrl T to triangulate. So this is the terrain we are getting here. And now we can look from the side and we can see it's a little bit too high and we need to move it down and flatten it a little bit. So tab in, select all, press S, then Z and scale it down like this and move it under the car just like that. Okay, now tab out, press Alt D, Y and 30 and we can parent the second one to the first one here, so Ctrl P and parent to object, so when we move the first, the second one moves as well. And now we can animate the terrain and we need it to be moving in this direction, so we need to start here. So let's press G then Y and -30, let's hit enter and let's press I and insert location, and we are still animating this first plane, the second one just follows. And now let's move to frame 120, let's press G then Y and let's enter 30 so it goes back. Let's confirm, press I and insert location keyframe once again. So now if you play back the animation, we get the correct movement, but it's easing in and out. So let's hover over the keyframes and press T and insert linear interpolation, and this way it will go at a constant speed. But this is too slow, so we actually need to tweak this animation length, and there are several ways how to do this. You could create, for example, more planes to scroll through them, but it's kind of time consuming, so there's a better way how to do that. Let's press G and move this keyframe to the frame 30 and let's test the speed. And if this is something you like, you just need to repeat this movement 4 times. And easy way to do it is with NLA strip. So let's switch back to the animation workspace and let's switch dope sheet to action editor. So this is our object action and it has its name, so let's call it ground so it's easily identifiable. And now we can push this down to NLA and let's switch this to nonlinear animation, and you can see it right here as a clip. Now we can press N to expand sidebar here as well. Let's select the strip here and let's expand the action clip and let's set repeat to 4. So we now have 4 of those here, and we can set the end of the animation to 120. So now if we play it back, let's go to the camera view. You can see we are looping quite nicely through the terrain. So that's the NLA for you, and basically if you now switch to the material preview, you can see there are some materials already on the car. So let's switch back to the layout view and we can add some material to the ground as well. So let's go to the material tab, click new, and let's set this to some like orange dust color or something, just like that, and let's call it dust. And now let's add the same material to our dust particle, and we can duplicate this and make it slightly brighter, and don't forget to increase roughness, and we can make the first one rough as well and maybe slightly darker. So there's a difference between the dust and the ground. And one more thing I want to do is to go here and disable emitter on those particles, and this needs to be done only for one of them because it's the same plane, so it will not be visible. So make sure it's not visible in any of those. Now let's make sure here as well. And now some lighting, so let's press Shift A and let's add a sunlight, press G then Z, move it up, and now hold period and switch to 3D cursor. Now press R, X 30 degrees and RZ 45 minus. So we have a nice light coming from the side, and let's switch to scene lights and scene world. So this is what it looks like. And now in the light settings, we need to increase this to something like 3 maybe, and we'll get some nice sharp shadows. Let's go to the render settings and enable ambient occlusion, bloom, and screen space reflection for some nicer previews, and you can additionally press Ctrl B to limit the render preview. And I will switch to the cycles right now and GPU, enable some denoising, and for the animation I think I'll go with only like 128 frames so it renders out quickly. And now let's preview the cycles and let's preview the animation. So I quite like this. Maybe it needs some more ambience, so let's go to the world settings and increase the world light intensity here to something stronger, and maybe you can give it some color like that. So there's always some more tweaks you can do to the particle settings, to the animation, to the noise properties and everything. You can go ahead and play around with those values to get something you really like, but this is the basics of animation loop like this. It should loop quite nicely, and then just go to the output settings, set your output path here, your format, whether you want to render PNG sequence or switch this to video and switch MP4 as encoding container, and then you can just go to render animation, and you should render the frames and get your nice animation. So that's it for some easy car animation loop for you. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, again, please leave a like, it will really help me. And again, if you're new to the channel and you'd like to see content like this in the future, please hit that subscribe. Thank you all for watching and have a wonderful day.